It's a great day to glorify God. This is Pastor Jason Poling coming to you from the Shelter from the Storm podcast. And we are in Mark chapter 8 today, and I'm in the New American Standard Translation. And so Mark chapter 8 really is a turning point in the book of Mark. So from the beginning, the first 7 chapters, we started out in the revelation of Jesus Christ on the scene, right? John the Baptist introduces him, and Jesus comes preaching the gospel of the kingdom. And he begins to call his disciples and to train them and demonstrate his authority and power over disease and death and demons. And he begins to have interactions with the Pharisaical leaders, the people who supposedly held up the truth and the commands and the law of God. And Jesus basically takes them to task at every point because they don't get it. They don't understand what God is all about. They don't understand what true religion is all about. They don't understand what a relationship with God is. And so they've got all these traditions, and Jesus continues to attack those wrong views that they have, which makes them more infuriated. And then Jesus begins to explain more about the kingdom of God and how it comes and it's small, and even his revelation of himself, the people slowly get it. And along the way, he does a feeding of the 5,000 with the 5 loaves. And so that's a miracle that we see that demonstrates his authority. And then he begins to go into the Gentile land. So he's beginning to show people that it's not just to the Jews that he's come to deliver and to show them the true way of the kingdom, but also to anyone who would see him and recognize him as the Messiah, the Son of God, the only means of salvation for mankind. So that puts us in Mark chapter 8, and most likely tomorrow we'll look at this great moment in Peter's life and the healing of the blind man, and how that symbolically represents the healing of our spiritual blindness. But for today, we're going to look at the feeding of the 4,000. And it actually does show a little bit of our spiritual blindness that we're battling, all of us. So anyway, Mark chapter 8, and we are 8 verse 1. In those days when again a great crowd had gathered and they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said to them, I have compassion on the crowd. Again, I love Jesus' heart towards people. He just loves us so much. He has compassion because they have been with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way, and some of them have come from far away. His disciples answered him, how can one feed these people with bread here in this desolate place? And he asked them, how many loaves do you have? And they said, 7. And he directed the crowd to sit down on the ground, and he took the 7 loaves, and having given thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to set before the crowd, and they set them before the crowd. And they had a few small fish, and having blessed them, he said that these also should be set before them. And they ate and were satisfied. And they took up the broken pieces left over, 7 baskets full, and there were about 4,000 people, and he sent them away. So it almost feels like deja vu, right? We just saw this, we thought, same scenario with the feeding of the 5,000. And it is similar. It's a similar healing, but it's not, as some sort of liberal scholars, they kind of critique this and say, see, the Bible's been miscompiled, or there was error. Why is this repetitive? Well, actually, it's a teaching moment. I don't understand why they perceive it that way, because we'll find here in a moment that Jesus is actually intending to instruct them about something deep in their hearts, and in our hearts that's a problem. So he's repeating a miracle, but with some small differences, some variables that help promote his message that he's trying to teach us. So the variables that we see here are that there are in this case 7 loaves of bread instead of 5 loaves like in the first miraculous feeding. And there's some other, I don't want to go into all the details, but that one's significant, 7 loaves, and there's 4,000 people, or in this case probably men, there's probably more women and children, but there's at least 1,000 less. So there's less people being fed with more bread. 7 loaves for 4,000 versus 5 loaves for 5,000. And at the end, with the first feeding, there were 12 basketfuls of fragments left over. And this one, there's 7 basketfuls of fragments left over. So let's go on here and we'll explain more, because Jesus does explain it for us. Verse 10, immediately he got into the boat with his disciples and went to the district of Dalmanutha. There we go. Dalmanutha. The Pharisees came and began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven to test him. Pharisees are seeking a sign again after they've already seen a bunch to test to see if he's really who he says he is. And Jesus sighs deeply in his spirit. You can just see the fatigue or the frustration or annoyance. I don't know all the emotions there. And he says, "Why does this generation seek a sign? Truly I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation." And he left them, got into the boat again, and went to the other side. Now, as they're traveling, or as they get to the other side, the disciples realized they had forgotten to bring bread, and they only had one loaf with them left in the boat. And Jesus, of course, knows what's going on inside of their hearts, worried about this one loaf left, and he cautioned them, saying, "Watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod." And they began discussing with one another the fact that they had no bread. And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, "Why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up?" They said to him, 12. "And the 7 for the 4,000, I'm making the disciples sound dumb. "And the 7 for the 4,000, how many basketfuls of broken pieces did you take up?" And they said to him, 7. And he said to them, "Do you not understand?" So I think what's going on here, and there's a lot of commentary on this, but it seems to be probably more simple than what a lot of commentators have made it into. Jesus is clearly addressing an issue of faith, a lack of faith that we all have, and a longing for more signs to have God prove himself. So you have this account of the miracle, and then you have the Pharisees inserted right there, right? So Mark wants to tell us these guys are still having issues after they've already seen a bunch of signs. They just had this heart of doubt. Just like in the desert, the first feeding of the 5,000, we talked about the parallels to the Old Testament when Moses is in the desert with the Israelites and God feeds them the manna from heaven and provides all their needs, the bread from heaven. And so God is doing that again here. And the Pharisees, like the Israelites of old, it's never enough. There's never enough signs to prove that they should give their lives and faith over to God. And so when the disciples get in the boat, and the disciples had seen the first 5,000 feeding miracle, they just saw the 4,000 feeding miracle, and now they're in a boat with a loaf of bread, and they're stressed out. They're probably fighting. How are they going to divide it up? And here they have God in their midst, willing to miraculously supply their needs, and they just saw it, and yet they still don't fully believe or get it. And so Jesus says to them, "Man, watch out. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod." So this leavening of the Pharisees is this leavening of unbelief, this yeast of unbelief, this yeast of blindness, spiritual blindness, that if you have it in you and you bake that bread, the bread of unbelief, it will continue to grow and become bigger, and it actually produces less fruit. Unbelief actually results in less, it creates more unbelief. So it results in less faith, less results, less trust of God, less vibrant Christian, relational connection, and deep spiritual life with God. So you have these two signs, these two miracles. 5,000 fed with 5 loaves. So more people fed with less bread by God. The second miracle, less people fed with more bread, more tools, more resources, more physical resources, feed less. And at the end, there's less leftover in the second miracle, even after less people ate, and there was actually more bread to begin with. In the first miracle, there was more left over, even after there were more people to feed, and there was less bread to begin with. So the the concept here, I think, is what's going on is you're going to have diminishing returns for every lack of faith that you have and demanding of God to prove himself to you before you'll finally give over your life to him. You're going to see less and less work of God in your life. You're gonna recognize his power less and less. You're going to see it less and less in your life. So that's why he's critiquing the disciples and saying, guys, do you not yet see? Are your hearts hardened? And he's like, I hope they're not hardened, because if they're hardened, they'll just get harder and harder still. To much is, to the one who has much, even more will be given to him. But the one who has a little, even what he has will be taken away from him. So the leaven of unbelief will take everything away from you. But if you have the true leaven, the leaven of Christ, the leaven of faith, you'll have what you have will be multiplied even further. You'll see greater things that God will do in your life if you believe him and believe that he is who he says he is. So that's kind of what I think is going on there, and it will take a turn towards this next section of text where we deal with the blind man and with Peter finally making a confession of faith. So it's a pivotal moment in the book of Mark. We'll look at that tomorrow. Have faith. Don't continue to demand a sign or a miracle out of God. He's already done amazing things for you. And if you just believe him based on what you already know about him and his word and his death, burial, and resurrection, and if you just trust him, you'll see the miracles. The fruit will come. But if you demand the miracles out of him, the signs out of him, you will get less and less.